Saturday the 23rd of January 1909. It was a cold morning, well, as you'd expect in a British winter. The limousine turned into the entrance of Schnumann Rubber Factory in Tottenham, North London, and paused just before the locked gates. Inside the vintage car were the factory owner's chauffeur, Joseph Wilson, and the 17-year-old office clerk, Albert Keyworth. Wilson had driven young Albert down to the bank in nearby Hackney to collect the weekly wages for the factory, as he always did on a Saturday, because Saturday was payday for the 150 staff of the factory, which made tyres for the newfangled motor cars. On the office clerk's lap was a bag containing £80 in gold, silver and copper coins, which is about £10,000 in today's money. As the car came to a stop before the gates on the corner of Tottenham High Road and Chestnut Grove, Albert Keyworth climbed out of the car and started to unlock them. Suddenly, a man seemed to appear from nowhere and tried to grab the money bag from him. As the two men struggled, the chauffeur, Joseph Wilson, left the car to save the wages. And now another man rushed forward, reaching inside his jacket. He pulled out a revolver and aimed it at Wilson. And then he fired. The Tottenham Outrage of 1909 is not a story about a scoreline or the antics of overpaid stars at Tottenham Hotspur Football Club, but a forgotten tale from Britain's social, political and indeed criminal history. It's sort of like The Untouchables meets the Keystone Cops, and I hope you enjoy this story. As the noise of the shot died away, Joseph Wilson, the chauffeur, was amazed to find himself completely unharmed. But in the confusion, the two robbers had managed to grab the money bag. Whilst continuing to fire, they were now sprinting down Chestnut Grove away from Tottenham High Road. Which is just as well, because almost opposite the factory on the High Road was Tottenham Police Station. Alerted by the sound of the gunfire, the police were now pouring out of the station like bees whose hive had just been disrupted, and they now gave chase. Some jumped on bicycles, some mounted horses, others clambered into motor cars, some simply gave chase on foot. One of them was PC William Tyler, a 31-year-old officer who lived here in Tottenham with his wife Emily. The robbers were not everyday criminals, nor was this any ordinary robbery. Paul Heffeld and Jacob Lepidus were Latvian Jewish anarchists, and at this particular moment in history, Europe was being swept by anarchist violence aimed at fomenting revolution against the established order. And indeed, these two particular fugitives had arrived in London on the run from Paris, where they had been involved on the periphery of an attempt to blow up the French president. This heist in Tottenham was not an attempt to start a revolution in Britain, but it was a means to obtain money for these anarchists to print and distribute revolutionary literature in Tsarist Russia. Turning north, the revolutionaries come robbers entered Mitchley Road, Tottenham, where Heffeld stopped to reload his gun. The police in a pursuing motor vehicle tried to run him down, but he jumped clear and the car crashed, injuring the officers inside. And then Heffeld calmly finished reloading his revolver and opened up on the pursuing police. One of his bullets hit 10-year-old Ralph Jocelyn in the chest. Ralph was earning pocket money delivering bread. He was declared dead at the scene. By now the pursuers had grown in number as members of the public joined the police. Labourers came off a building site. Footballers gave up their game. Gypsies left their caravans to join the chase. Joseph Wilson, the chauffeur, was back in the thick of it. He was driving the company limo, chasing the fugitives. And still the fugitives ran. And still they fired. And finally a shot hit the radiator of the Schnumann company limo, ending Wilson's pursuit. Interestingly, Wilson, he was wearing one of these big long leather chauffeur's coats, a bit like you've probably seen in Downton Abbey before Tom got promoted. And on that leather coat there were 9 grazes from bullets. But the only injury that Wilson actually had was a graze to his neck. Amazing story. By now, some members of the public had armed themselves with guns that they'd retained from various colonial wars. Britain didn't have the tight gun laws that it has now, and were, along with the police, firing on the fugitives. One woman threw potatoes at them as they passed. At this time, Tottenham was almost the last part of North London before open countryside. Edmonton to the north was still separated from Tottenham by fields. And to the east were the Tottenham marshes, where the River Lee flowed, and beyond that Chingford and Epping Forest. And it was towards the east that Lepidus and Hafeld now fled. Just before they hit open countryside, they were confronted by PC William Tyler, who uttered the classic British Bobby cry, "Come on, give up, the game's up." One of the fugitives raised his gun and shot Williams through the head. Now out onto the Tottenham marshes the revolutionaries ran, still chased by the police and by the civilian posse. By now duck shooters on the marshes were taking shots at them, but they were out of range. Running alongside the River Lee, they crossed over a small bridge and ran along the south side of Banbury Reservoir, which is still there to this day. They'd now been running for about 3 miles, carrying that heavy bag of wages and constantly firing at their pursuers. But they had no intention of giving up. Coming out of the marshes, they took over a tram, the number 9 tram, on the Chingford Road. And in the commotion, the driver fled, and Lepidus forced the ticket inspector to drive south, which was interesting because the ticket inspector had never driven a tram before in his life. Some police officers commandeered a horse and cart, and they set off in pursuit behind the tram. Heffeld stood at the back of the tram, firing at them, and he finally hit their horse, put them out of action. The police now commandeered a tram that had been heading in the opposite direction, and they started to reverse it after the robbers. 40 policemen clambered on board, some wielding truncheons, some carrying guns, one even armed with a naval cutlass. And meanwhile, on the fugitives' getaway tram, the ticket inspector, who was now driving, told them they were heading towards a police station. It was actually a lie, but the fugitives did not want to run into a trap, so they jumped off the tram. Running across the road, they spotted a milkman doing his rounds in his pony and trap. They rushed over, shot the driver, and leapt onto the trap and whipped the horse into a gallop. So now we have a high-speed horse and cart trace going on through what's now the London borough of Walthamstow. Unfortunately for the robbers, they took a corner too fast and the trap overturned in Forest Road. Unperturbed, they now ran across, they saw a greengrocer's cart, they headed over there, they leapt onto that, they took it over, and they headed north out towards open countryside. And still the police and the posse pursued them. Finally, Lepidus and Hafelt decided to jump off the cart and run towards the safety of Epping Forest. Crossing over the River Ching in Chingford, they reached a large fence. Lepidus, the taller of the two men, cleared it, but the shorter Hafelt struggled. Realising that the game was up, he urged Lepidus to keep running, and then he turned towards the police. And putting his gun to his head, he pulled the trigger. Mrs. Ralston of Oak Cottage came out to see what all the commotion was about. And she turned to see a blood-smeared Lepidus running into her house and locking the door. The armed and desperate revolutionary was now inside her house, with her on the outside, but with her 2 children inside the house with him. Her screams swiftly brought the police to the house. Lepidus retreated upstairs while the police smashed down the front door and rescued the children. The police now opened fire on the bedroom where Lepidus was holed up, and when they finally stormed the room, they found that the Latvian revolutionary had shot himself dead. The Tottenham Outrage was a robbery or heist that is both comical, but it was also deadly. I mean, it cost the lives of PC William Tyler and also young Ralph Jocelyn. During the 6-mile chase involving horses and traps, trams, men on foot, 400 shots had been fired, and a further 7 police and 17 civilians had been injured. Lepidus was secretly buried in an unconsecrated grave in Walthamstow Cemetery. Paul Hafelt had not died when he'd turned that gun on himself at the fence. Critically wounded, he was taken to Tottenham Hospital, where 3 weeks later he died, and he too was buried in an unconsecrated grave. The funeral of PC William Tyler was massive. 3,000 police officers lined the 2.5-mile route from his house in Arnold Road to Abney Park Cemetery in Tottenham. It's estimated that 500,000, 500,000 civilians lined that route. Blinds were drawn in the houses along the route and shops closed and blacked out their windows. Ralph Jocelyn was buried yards from William Tyler in that same cemetery. The bravery displayed by the officers in the Tottenham Outrage led to the creation of the King's, and now Queen's, Police Medal for Gallantry, and the first recipient, posthumously, was PC William Tyler. Oh, and the bag of wages, well, that was never recovered. The robbers probably dumped it in one of the many water hazards they encountered on the Tottenham marshes, or maybe in the River Ching. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed that short, forgotten story from British history, comical and sad at the same time. If you did, then please subscribe below or get more exclusive talks at my website, thehistorychap.com. Thanks for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you very soon.